But chapter 1 finishes with the amazing decision by the young man in this foreign culture, offered a chance at success by the world's emerging superpower. And I suppose the key really to the rest of this man's life can be found in chapter 1, where it says in verse 8, Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's foods or with the wine that he drank. And that decision really is a decision of the heart, because that's the thing that Nebuchadnezzar wants more than anything else, is the heart of these young Hebrew boys. He wants their heart to become, assimilated into the worldview that he's trying to promote. But Daniel, as a teenager, takes the amazing step not to defile himself, not to go along with things that he knows are not right. And in doing that, God graciously provides a means for him to do that, and opens a door for him to remain consistent to his faith and to even serve as a civil servant in the Babylonian court. Chapter 2 is interesting because in chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, but he has a sort of a breakdown. He, instead of using the normal tools at his disposal to find out what the meaning of this dream was, he instead decides to test the religious experts of his day. And it's kind of like, I guess, a guy that has become disillusioned with his psychiatrist, or disillusioned with the, with the big author or influential thinker of his day. And he says, interestingly, after the dream, he says in chapter 2, verse 8, the king answered and says, well, shall I go back a verse? He says in verse verse 6, verse 5. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the word from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be laid in ruins. Nebuchadnezzar offers them a challenge. He says, you guys claim to understand the human soul. You guys claim to understand the way the world works. I'm not too convinced. Instead of telling you the dream that I had, I want you to tell me the dream I had and explain it to me. And the Magi, or the Chaldeans, the people that are experts at this, they explain to him, they say, the thing you ask is impossible. Nobody can tell you what your dream was unless you tell it to us. And they interestingly say in verse 11, they say, the thing that the king asks is difficult. No one can show it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. And that's a key theological insight into their understanding of God, or the gods. So far removed from humanity, so far removed from the people that they created. They don't dwell with us. We can't ask them, tell us your dream. We can try and help you out. To move on, basically, Nebuchadnezzar offers the chance once more, and then he decides to kill all of these religious experts. Daniel and his friends, they pray for wisdom, and God gives it to them. And this was the dream that God reveals to Daniel that Nebuchadnezzar had. He had a dream of a statue. It had a head of gold, a chest and arms of silver, thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet with iron and clay. And a stone that was cut without hands destroyed the statue into smithereens. And Daniel successfully explains the meaning of this vision. And it's pretty provocative because, Nebuchadnezzar probably had a fair idea of what the dream probably meant before he even asked these guys. He sees a statue, it's awe-inspiring, it's beautiful, and suddenly it gets smashed to bits. He's probably thinking, is that me? Is the end around the corner? And he's so anxious about it. He wants to test the people that claim to know the answers, because he knows they're probably going to say, no, it's your enemies. That's what it means. Like, your enemies will be destroyed. And he wants to get the truth, and so he refuses to tell them what the dream was. But Daniel correctly tells him what the dream was and its interpretation. This idea of 4 kingdoms is very important to understand, because it repeats throughout the book. the rest of the visions follow on from this same sequence. The first kingdom, the head of gold, the head of gold is the Babylonian kingdom. The chest of silver is the Medo-Persian Empire. The bronze is the Greeks, and the iron is Rome. And the feet mixed with iron and clay is a future kingdom that will come, and that speaks of the end times. So Daniel correctly interprets it. Prayer for Daniel is something that repeats again throughout the book. We see it time and time again that Daniel is a man that has a desire to keep his heart pure and to be in constant communion with God. And that's a remarkable thing when you consider where he's come from. He's come from a Judaism that is just stinking with corruption and, apostasy. But yet he comes to Babylon with a desire to keep his heart pure and to keep himself in contact with God by prayer. Chapter 3 is a follow-on from what happened. Nebuchadnezzar, instead of maybe contemplating the implications of this vision, the sovereignty of God in establishing and bringing down world government, he sees himself more, well, Daniel said I was the head of gold, like the head of gold. And so we see in chapter 3, Daniel, or that Nebuchadnezzar creates a statue entirely of gold. Not just the head, the chest, the legs, everything of gold. And in a sense, it's almost like an act of defiance, because Nebuchadnezzar says, I'm not just the head, I'm the whole coot and caboodle here. I am what it is. There's not going to be anything after me. There's not going to be any rock smashing it. I am the gold. And he forces a state cult of personality, where people have to worship him as the supreme God. It's an attempt maybe to reassert dominance over the Babylonian Empire, but it really is an act of defiance against God. And yet we see the refusal so bravely of 3 young Hebrews to go along with this. Chapter 3, verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to give answer to you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. That is such an amazingly powerful passage. For them, the issue is God's glory. The issue is not their safety. The issue is not their deliverance. They have complete faith in God, and God's glory is their only concern. If it is that God will deliver them, well and good. If not, well and good. The issue is we will not serve your statue. We will not commit idolatry. And if you notice, faith is an amazing thing. Faith in today's society is something that is seen as a weakness. It is seen as something to be scoffed at. It is seen as a flaw in someone's character. This idea of faith. Faith is almost like a bad word. How can you just have faith, blind faith. When you look at Christ, the incarnate Son of God, I think it's amazing to see what Jesus marveled at when he walked amongst men and women. What did he marvel at? He marveled at people's faith, and he marveled at people's lack of faith. That's an amazing thing, to think that God, the Son, marveled at someone's faith. He stopped, turned around and said, not even in Israel have I seen such faith as this. And that's amazing. When you think, what do we marvel at? What do we have to step back and say, oh, hold on there, guys, that's heavy. For Christ, it was faith. In today's society, faith is seen as something to be ashamed of. It is seen as something that is a character flaw. For these guys, faith was, the natural outworkings of their theology. God is on the throne. God is sovereign. We cannot, we will not bow down and commit this idolatry to your empty worldview, to your empty philosophy. You know, throws in the fire, do what you want. God will be glorified. Very powerful